Hey guys, what's happening? It's Monday, August the 10th, and I'm going to talk about airbrushes. I saw a conversation on Facebook this morning that made me think about doing this. There's tons of videos on YouTube about airbrushing and how to airbrush and what airbrush to buy, and so there's no shortage of that. But some of you guys know, if you followed my videos, that I have some physical limitations with my hands. And so when I decided to get back into scale modeling almost a year ago, I was faced with the decision of what kind of an airbrush to buy. And I wanted a double action, but I knew that I was not going to be able to operate one, at least not confidently. I can push down on the trigger and I can pull back on the trigger with a little bit more difficulty, but doing both at the same time with any level of control is practically impossible for me, because it's also difficult for me to maintain a good steady grip at the same time I'm having to do all that. So anyway, I just thought it would be maybe useful for some of you guys if I just told you a little bit about my journey through what is now 4 different airbrushes and which ones they are and why I selected each one. Now, this is not intended to be any kind of a review or a recommendation, just like I said, just a conversation. And maybe especially for some of you guys who are trying to decide what airbrush you want to buy, it'll be helpful. So here we go. Let's get into it. The first one that I bought is this little Iwata HP M2. Now this, as you can see, is kind of different from what you're used to seeing. And this thing is pretty unique in a couple of different ways. First of all, even though it looks like it's a dual action airbrush, it's actually single action. All you do is press down on the trigger and off you go. Now this one's got a 0.4 millimeter needle in it, and you adjust the amount of paint flow by just screwing the needle in or out. And it's even got numbers on the dial here so that you can figure out exactly where you want to set it for whatever type of paint you're doing. Now the reason that I bought this one first was because, number one, it was single action. I liked the idea of being able to just screw this knob back here to adjust the paint flow. And I also saw quite a bit of information about it being really easy to clean. I mean, basically you unscrew the air cap, take out the needle, take off the nozzle, and that's about as much as you can actually disassemble the thing. So cleaning it is extremely easy, and operating it is, at least for me, is pretty easy as well. Now, as I worked with it, I learned a couple of things that made it not quite so easy. One is that, as you guys know, acrylic paints just tend to clog airbrushes like nobody's business. And one of the things that's good about a dual action airbrush that helps with that is the fact that you can always move the needle in and out and shoot a blast of air through there to kind of clear things up. With this one, because the needle is in a fixed position, you can't do that. And I have had a lot of trouble with this one, with clogging and having to go back and flush it out, and that can be a real pain in the ass. Now I kind of developed a method for using it where I just every so often I'd spray a little bit, and then I'd run some thinner through it, load it back up with paint, spray some more, and I got to where I could make it work pretty well. But there were some paints that just, quite frankly, just wouldn't work. And one of those was all-clad aluminum. And I tried all kinds of combinations of pressure and needle settings, and I just couldn't make it work. And I finally figured out that that particular paint would basically clog up the nozzle even if it was 100% clean, and I hadn't even started spraying. And my theory on that is that the pigment load in that metallic paint is just so high that basically it all gets packed in there from gravity, and it just can't flow. And so, because of the basic design of this airbrush, and not being able to move the needle on the fly, I just realized there were some paints that were never going to work. And that led me to buy my second airbrush. Oh, before I forget, this one cost me, I think, just about a little over $100. I think maybe $110 from Chicago Airbrush. So if you're interested in one of those, it is a pretty good value. But to address the issues that I was having with not being able to spray certain paints, and also because I wanted something that would allow me to cover large areas, since I was in the middle of working on a 1/32 P51, I decided to get the Pasch Pash, however you say it, H model airbrush. And part of that was based on the fact that I watched a couple of videos. One of them from he's the one of the Mythbusters guys, Adam Savage. He was talking about how when he first started working at ILM and he went in there with his super fancy dual action airbrush, that all the old hands had one of these. And that kind of clicked in my head, and I thought, okay, well, if it's good enough for those guys, surely it's good enough for me, even though it's only a $60 airbrush. And in fact, it immediately solved my problem in spraying things like all-clad aluminum. Runs through it like it was made for it. Now, I did forget to mention, this is also a single-action airbrush. It's siphon fed, and the way that you adjust the amount of paint flow with this one is just by turning this little nozzle adjuster right here. So again, it's like the Iwata in that you set it and forget it, or set it and shoot it as it happens. And this thing actually has some options you can get with it. This right now has the number 3 nozzle in it, but there's a smaller one and a larger one. And it's kind of cool because they have little bands on them that tell you which one you've got in there. This one's got 3 bands on it. The number 5 has 5 bands on it. And this thing is great for covering large areas. So if you're shooting a large model and you've got to spray some clears or some primers, this thing will put the paint down in a big hurry. So I really like it for that. It atomizes really well. I do find that the pressures that I have to use with this one are quite a bit higher than they are with my other airbrushes. And that is because this is siphon fed instead of gravity fed, which means that it's got to provide enough suction to pull paint up out of this cup, working against gravity. And you can also put larger bottles on this if you've got to really move a lot of paint. Now, one thing that I don't like about this is that even though it is it's the simplest of my airbrushes, it's also the biggest pain in the ass to deal with once I've got to clean it. And part of that is because of the fact that it's siphon fed. Not only do you have to worry about getting all of the paint out of the nozzle, but you've got to clean the cup or the bottle or whatever it is. And and it's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with from that standpoint. But again, that's just part of the package, and every tool has its pluses and minuses. But that really is the only reason that I could ever find to gripe about this Pasch H model. However, I found that once I really got into more pre-shading and doing a little bit more, I guess what you'd call precision work with an airbrush, that neither of those two were really doing the job for me. And I knew that I needed a dual action airbrush. I needed something that gave me more control. But again, I still had the problem of being able to operate the trigger. So I decided to try and find an actual trigger style airbrush. Something along the lines that, more like a traditional spray gun. And my good buddy Gil Mondragon recommended that I look into the Iwata HP TH, and this is part of their custom line. Now, when I first saw the price tag on this thing, I had massive sticker shock because from Chicago Airbrush, this thing retails for like $450. It's pretty expensive, especially after you add the handle accessory and the quick connects to it. But I was able to go direct to Japan through eBay and got it for about half that. And I got to tell you, I think it's been some of the smartest money that I've spent in scale modeling so far, because this thing has become my workhorse. And some of you, if you know the specifications on this thing, might be a little bit surprised by that, because this has an enormous needle in it. It's a 0.5 millimeter needle. And that might seem way too big for some things. But what a lot of people don't realize is that needle size alone is not the only thing that controls how fine of a line you can spray. It also has to do with the shape of the nozzle, the size of the nozzle, and the shape of the needle. And Paul Budzik has a really good video explaining all that, so I'm not going to go into it. But suffice it to say, don't be totally fixated on needle size. There's really no way to tell how fine a detail you're going to be able to shoot with an airbrush until you've got it in your hand, I suppose. But just do your homework if you're thinking about buying one. And if everything else about an airbrush seems like it will work for you, but it doesn't have what you think is the ideal needle size, don't let that stop you. Get it, try it out, because there's a good chance that it's going to do what you want it to do in spite of that fact. Now, this thing is really cool. One reason I like it is that it's very easy to clean, and it doesn't get clogged up nearly as easily as something with a smaller needle. I pretty much don't ever have to worry about bending the needle because it is so huge, and that's nice when you're as clumsy as I am. Now, one thing that I really like about it is that this has a needle stop. So with this adjuster right here, I can control how far the trigger will pull. And that's really nice when I'm doing fine work, because I have a tendency to be too heavy-handed, and that gives me a little bit of extra control. Something else that's cool about the Iwata HPTH is that it comes with a fan tip that you can put on here. Now, a fan spray is really nice because there's a lot of characteristics of a fan pattern as opposed to a round pattern that are really important for painting a really smooth finish, especially when it comes to doing gloss coats. And that's why any automotive gun that you would ever use pretty much is going to have a fan spray pattern. Now, the fan tip on this one is not quite the same as getting a spray gun with a real adjustable fan head on it. It's kind of a hybrid, and so it's not perfect, but it does work on larger surfaces. But the truth is, I don't really need it that much, because for 1/48th aircraft or 1/35th scale vehicles like the little Jeep I'm working on right now, the regular head is more than sufficient to give me good coverage. Now, you may have noticed that this has an adjuster right here on the bottom. Maybe you can see it right here. Now, that's a flow rate adjuster. And that's one thing that's kind of weird about a trigger style airbrush. Even though it's ostensibly a dual action airbrush because the needle moves back and forth and the airflow happens at the same time, it's almost more like this is a 1.5 action airbrush. Let me explain what I mean by that. With a true dual action airbrush, where you're pressing down on the trigger and pulling back at the same time, you've essentially got an infinite number of possibilities for the combinations of airflow and paint flow. With a trigger style, the airflow is whatever it is, and you can't really control that, and that gives you a little less flexibility than a true dual action. And that's where this adjuster comes in. That basically lets you dial in the flow rate to whatever you need it to be. So if you want to just bleed out a tiny bit of paint, you can do that. It's not quite as organic as working with a dual action would be, but again, that's a trade-off that I have to make because I need this type of trigger pull. And quite frankly, that doesn't prove to be much of an issue because I don't find myself wanting to change the size of the line that I'm generating on the fly. I'm pretty much am going to want to spray the same size pattern for the entire session. And if I don't, then I just stop, change the flow, and get it dialed into where I need it, and then keep going. So overall, it works pretty good. And again, this thing has proven to be a real workhorse for me. But, yes, there's a but. I have struggled in pre-shading, which was a little bit of a disappointment because, as I said, that was one of the main reasons that I bought it. And it's not that it won't do the small lines, I mean, it will, but I've just struggled in finding that sweet spot. And I have thought that a smaller and different shaped needle might make that a little bit less challenging. But I still needed a trigger style action, so I bought myself just recently this Iwata Neo, and this is the Neo with the trigger action and the grip on it. It's the TRN1 specifically. Now this is a much less expensive unit than the HPTH. I think this one's about $200 if you buy it in the United States. I bought it again through eBay for just over $100, so really good value. This has a 0.35 millimeter needle in it, and if you look at the two needles between the TH and this one, not only is this one a smaller needle, but it has a very long, skinny, tapered point to it, and that really helps in generating very fine lines. So between that and the fact that this one also has a trigger stop, I'm hoping that this will help me with some of that more more detailed, finer scale work, where I really want to be able to spray a small pattern and have the subtlety that I need for pre-shading work. Now, one thing that this one does not have that the TH does is the flow rate adjuster. So this one is definitely going to be a matter of learning how to control that trigger, as I've already found out just in testing it a little bit. But I feel like it's going to be a good addition to my stable of airbrushes, and ultimately that's all that matters, is that each tool you add to your box is helping you enhance your capabilities. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of all of my airbrushes, and again, not a recommendation or a review. Just thought you guys might be interested in how I've selected them and added them to my toolbox based on my own particular needs. One thing that I think it's really important to consider, though, is that no single airbrush is going to do everything, nor is it going to solve your problems if you're having paint. There's a tendency in I think all hobbies for people to feel like that a particular brand or a particular model of something is going to be the magic bullet. I mean, when I was a motocross guy, I saw it all the time. Guys arguing about whether or not the Yamaha or the Honda was the best bike. As a photographer, I see guys arguing all the time about whether Nikon or Canon is the best. With airbrushes, is it Iwata, is it Harder Steenbeck, is it Badger, whatever it is. Each of them has pros and cons. They are not all made the same. That's not to say that one is better quality than the other. It's just that each of those folks has a different design philosophy. So it's important to remember that even though an Iwata and a Harder Steenbeck may have the same size needle, those needles may not be the same shape. The nozzle may not be the same shape. And so those two airbrushes may not perform exactly the same way under a given set of conditions. Again, a lot of it's going to just boil down to your particular style, your particular demands and the way that you work. But what's going to matter the most in the long run is your own particular skill. And the only way you're going to get that is to just buy an airbrush. Just pick one and use it. Use the heck out of it and figure out, how it works for you. And if it does or doesn't, then you can make a decision about trying something different. But the bottom line is, it's much more about the guy holding the airbrush than it is the airbrush itself. So don't get too hung up on picking a particular flavor. Just get one and get some painting done. All right, guys. I hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions about any of these or about any airbrushing things in general, just hit me up. I don't consider myself an expert on airbrushing. I just have tried to share knowledge that I've picked up along the way as I've gone through this. But I do kind of have broad experience with painting. I've painted everything from farm equipment to this stuff, and I've used a variety of different types of equipment along the way. So I don't know everything, but I know a little, and I'd be glad to help if you have questions. All right, guys, take care. Much love.